We had a little minor emergency. We have a forum, Mr. Englander, Mr. Cardenas, Mr. Koretz, myself, Bernard Parks, as chair. On this agenda, let me ask colleagues, can we move item 6 on consent?
Good move.
Okay. One thing I'd ask, I think there's a couple of typos on both reports. If we can ask the clerk to work with correcting those for this final report. So we'll move that one on consent. We have 4 items in closed session, 1 through 4, and then on regular session 5, 7, and 8. So we'll go in closed session at this time. Before we do that, let me ask public comment. Cheryl, is it Ajeli? General public comment?
Do I just sit at one of these?
Right here, whatever mic you'd like.
No, I can pick your color of cord and.
I messed up your last name. What?
Spikely.
Okay.
Runs with Spikely.
Okay.
And how many minutes?
You get 2 minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead and get started.
My name is Cheryl Eichley, and I am a member of Occupy Los Angeles. I am here speaking on behalf of myself because any decisions the group makes goes through a general consensus process. I'm here as a concerned citizen to speak in regards to the responsible banking ordinance that this council or this committee is currently looking at. I know it's not on today's agenda, but I'd like to come and just speak in regards to it. I'm a bit confused about what's going on in regards to the responsible banking ordinance. I've read the ordinance myself, and I've heard some comments from the council and city officials, and I'm very confused about what I heard from the city's administrative office, the report that indicated that if this responsible banking ordinance went through, it would cost the city $58 million in fines and fees from the banks that I guess we're already working with. My concern is this responsible banking ordinance requires financial institutions that want to do business with the city to provide us with some information like how many houses have they foreclosed on in the city of Los Angeles. It asks them how many small businesses have they invested in the city of Los Angeles, and it asks them a few other questions, and I'm actually trying to figure out exactly what it asks them, but there are a few things I see that it does ask them. It seems like for the citizens of Los Angeles, it is better for us to work with banks that are responsible and for us to know how many houses they have foreclosed on, how many loan modifications they've worked with, and how many small business and community organizations they've been able to invest in the city of Los Angeles. And so I hope that you guys will be able to work with the concerned citizens and either push this responsible banking ordinance through or amend it so that it does benefit the city of Los Angeles, the citizens, not just the city officials and those that get paid from the city and all of that. So I appreciate your time today, and I will let you guys get back to your business.
Wait, hold on just a minute, Mr.
I have
Cardenas
a question for you, if you could maybe talk with your colleagues.
Yes.
If you and or your colleagues could tell us if there is a bank that actually meets your criteria of what a responsible bank would be.
I think the ordinance calls for specific information to be given to us by the financial institution.
Sure.
And what I would like to do is see that information. I'm personally trying to research the foreclosures in the city of Los Angeles and some of that stuff. I saw that the Central City Association had written you a letter, and they had indicated that these banks that we're talking about have given a lot in like nonprofit money, invested in nonprofits. I'm trying to figure out what nonprofits. Is it truly nonprofits that benefit our community, or is it a nonprofit like the Central City Association that gets paid to lobby the city? So I'm myself trying to figure all of this out. So if I could work with people through the city or find out what offices to go to, that would help me a lot in my efforts.
Let me just say one thing. On the 21st of November,
Yes, I know.
This item will be coming to this committee, and the following day there will be a briefing to full council. And one of the things I think that this committee has been grappling with, and those who are putting the report together, is that in reality the city only deals with one bank. retail bank. That's the city's banker. That
The what?
deals, the city's banker, which is Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo.
Okay, and so when you talk about the issues that deal with loan modifications, foreclosures, that's talking about retail banks. And so even if there's a retail bank and they also have underwriting function, those are kept totally separate.
Okay.
And so the issue is that for underwriting business, which we just approved a list of about 15 or 20 underwriters, they don't participate in all the things you just listed. The retail banks do participate, but in essence, the city, in dealing with once every so many years, puts out an RFP for a bank to do city's business. So there's not a lot of business being done by the city with retail banks.
Okay.
And so, but again, we'll be back on the 21st to be briefed with the reports, and my assumption is they'll be in council file
Okay.
well before that.
Okay.
And then we'll be briefing the full council the following day.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go in closed session on items 1 through 4.
Recommendation 1 to appropriate $100,000 from the unappropriated balance city attorney outside counsel line item to the city attorney fund 100 department 12 account 009301. Also authorize the city attorney to contract with the law firm of Myers, Knopf, Reback, Silver, and Wilson to assist in those 3 cases that I mentioned earlier. And then the last instruction will be to authorize the city attorney or designee to prepare controller instructions for any technical adjustments, subject to the approval of the CAO, and authorize the controller to implement those instructions.
Okay, thank you. Next item.
So that should take us to item number 5. Item 5, the city attorney report relative to the approval of contracts with bond counsel firms of Kutak, Rock, and Hawkins.
Let me ask you, someone here from Housing and Hakala? Because one of the things, it appears we're going to hold this in committee, but ask the CAO and to review the city attorney's request. Has Hakala Housing agreed, or Housing agreed to use the Hakala process?
Yeah, Ann Haley, City Attorney's Office, the Housing Department. We, as city attorneys representing both Housing and HACLA, control basically the RFP process and interviewing of law firms, outside counsel. And yes, the Housing Department actually requested, in the interest of time, that we just utilize the process that HACLA used for the hiring of bond counsel. So they are in agreement, in answer to your question.
The current panel, Councilman Parks, are currently with, serving as counsel for the Housing Department currently, as well as for HACLA.
All right. Let me just say, for the interest of time, colleagues, if we just hold this in committee and ask the CAO to review the city attorney's request as well as the RFP used by Hakala to select bond counsel and report back to the committee whether the RFP meets the city's requirements and standards. And how long will we take to do that?
Oh, how long would it take? I'm sorry.
We have to bring it back. We need 2 weeks, 30 days.
You're asking the CAO to look
Yeah.
at it first?
We want the CAO to look at this process that's being recommended.
As soon as.
Yeah, we'll try to bring it back for the next meeting.
Okay? So that's when the,
I think it's the 14th.
okay. So we'll ask that this be held in committee to November 14th, as the CAO to comment on this recommendation by the city attorney regarding the use of this RFP.
And we'd be happy to provide you whatever information you need, Mr. CAO.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next item.
Okay, item 7 is Office of Finance report relative to the investment report for the period ending September 30th, 2011.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Antoinette Cristoval, City Treasurer. With me today is Tom Juarez. He is the Chief Investment Officer. We can go over the report, sir, or respond
Just
to
give us a
questions.
very brief thumbnail of the report, and then a couple of questions that deal with responsible banking, how you've incorporated what the issues are in responsible banking into your analysis of dealing with retail bankers.
Okay. With regards to our report, I'll just briefly speak to the economy. The U.S. growth increase, as reflected by the gross domestic product, grew by 2.5% for the third quarter. And although this is an improvement from the prior period of 1.3%, it still remains relatively moderate at best. With regards to unemployment, it remained unchanged at 9.1% nationally and 11.8% as it relates to the city of Los Angeles. With regards to the capital markets, the Federal Reserve has indicated that they intend to keep interest rates low for the next 2 years in an effort to spur economic growth. And relative to our interest earnings as it relates to our investment report, we are on track to meet the $14 million budgeted investment earnings for the fiscal year. In terms of the report itself, the core portfolio is about $757 million with an effective yield of 1.6%. The reserve portfolio, which is a longer-term portfolio, is about $5.6 billion with an effective yield of 1.69%. The average maturity overall for the investment pool is about 2.4 years, and the average credit ratings on the investments are AAA. As it relates to the investment performance relative to our benchmark, we are tracking fairly closely on the core portfolio. The reserve portfolio, we're slightly better compared to the benchmark that we use for comparison purposes.
Okay. And let me ask you, you mentioned on both the annual growth rate and the U.S. consumer spending, they're both up. Is that an indication that we're on an upswing, or is that just momentary, or what do we evaluate those two issues?
Well, we believe that that is an indication that it is on an upswing. As you know, the gross domestic product basically measures the market value of goods and services, and because we have seen an increase from the second quarter, which was as of June 30th, from 1.3% to 2.5%, that shows that it is improving. But of course, for California, we're somewhat slow in improvement overall.
Let me ask you, what would be the impact on our investments if Moody's downgrades the U.S. debt again?
We don't believe that will have any impact on our investments.
No, none at all?
No.
Okay. And then let me just ask the city attorney. A while back, the treasurer asked for an ordinance that dealt with the reconstituted investment advisory committee. Do we know what the status of that ordinance is?
I don't believe that there's a representative here from the city attorney's office, but I have had discussions with our city attorney liaison, Ms. Beverly Cook. She indicated that she does not believe it's been assigned as of yet, but she was going to look into it, and I expect that I should be hearing back from her in the coming weeks.
Let me ask the CAO, could you help our Office of Finance? We've been waiting now since 2009 for that, and so if we can see if we can't get that done. And then let me ask you another question. When you invest in securities, as your report reflects, are you investing in retail banks, or are you investing in buying securities from entities that are not retail banks? Where does that investment go? Is it in the retail bank industry?
I'll have our investment advisor speak.
Hi, good afternoon. Tom Juarez, Chief Investment Officer. Good question. Actually, there's a huge difference. We do not deal with the retail banking sector with the investment brokerage firms. We deal strictly with institutional, on the institutional level, which, as you mentioned with the public speaker earlier, there's a clear and distinct difference between retail banking and institutional, and we deal with the institutional services.
When you say institutional, what are you referring?
Institutional broker-dealers deal with larger municipalities, corporations, investment managers, such as the city, as opposed to, say, you and I that may go to a retail brokerage firm and they deal with mom and pop, so to speak.
Okay. Is it accurate for us to say that in dealing with retail banks, is that every 3 to 4 years when you put out an RFP to determine who the city's banker is that the only retail bank that you deal with?
No, that is not. Actually, we have Bank of America. There's a small amount that's left in that particular account, and we intend to close it.
But that was because of the transition to another bank?
It was because of the transition, but we've been with Wells Fargo, Wachovia for almost 3 years. So we're looking to close the remaining balance that's there. There are some outstanding checks, and we're working with the Controller's Office.
Our primary bank is Wells Fargo.
That is correct.
And other than funds that are in the transition of closing them down, is Wells Fargo, is it accurate to say, is the only retail bank that you deal
Yes.
with? Okay. And then when you go to securities and invest, that's with institutions, so you're not dealing with retail banks there. So I'm trying to get a sense of where this issue of foreclosures and dealing with responsible banking, if you're only dealing with one bank, that would come in every, 5 years when you're going out to RFP?
It's generally a little longer than that,
Okay.
but of course, the current contract expires in 5 years.
5 years with
Yes.
a 5-year option or something?
Right.
Right. So that would be the only time that those questions would be asked, is during that review process, when you get to the point of looking for a new banker.
That is correct. We actually, when we go out with an RFP, we do follow the California Government Code in terms of ensuring that we are protecting the city's interests and our duty to ensure that deposits are properly in the appropriate banks, and that they are secure.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because the CAO and CLA is writing this report for the 21st. The impression that people give is that we're doing business with a lot of retail bankers that are dealing with modified loans and foreclosures and all that other. In reality, we're dealing with one retail bank as relates to dealing with the city's business, and we deal with a lot of underwriters for a variety of debt service.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to clarify, because otherwise, the impression is we have all of these responsible banking, that we have all these banks we're doing business with. Okay.
On a possible counterpoint of view to that, I think we're talking about, in some cases, a retail bank that has other functions, and even though they're not related, if they've been bad actors, if we've sued them, if we have active lawsuits against them, even if it's not their retail arm, I think that's certainly something we should be looking at too. So I'm not sure if this is an open and shut question or not.
No, I think clearly we've sued some underwriters, and as that suit evolves, we certainly should be taking the action. But I just want to clarify, when we hear all the things about foreclosures, modified loans, and all the things that deal with those kinds of activities, we only deal with one bank that is in that business. We certainly have a lawsuit on some underwriters who we think in the derivative lawsuit that identified some wrongdoing. We have not found them yet to say they have been found guilty or sanctioned, but clearly we have a lawsuit in that area. And I get concerned when I hear everybody talking about the whole deal with financial responsibility of banking as though we do business with a bunch of banks, and we don't. And I think I think the criteria that eventually will be, identified for underwriters is going to be significantly different than the criteria if you're a commercial or retail bank, because they don't deal with all of these modified loans and things of that nature. So there's going to have to be a different criteria for underwriters as opposed to retail bankers.
That is correct, sir. We actually will be reporting back with the CAO's office in terms of the impact on the operational side relative to our current banking relationship with Wells Fargo. So we do intend to address that.
Other questions? Okay, we'll move that item to council. Thank you. Thanks. Next item. You're on this one also?
Sorry?
This is yours also, on numbers?
Yep, item 8, yes. This
Yes.
is the Office of Finance quarterly report for fourth quarter 2010-11 on accounts receivable.
Good afternoon. Antoinette Cristobal, Director of Finance. With me today is Jeffrey Whitmore, the Revenue Manager, and Edwin, I can't pronounce your last name. Avanasan, with the Office of Finance. Today before you is the fourth quarterly report for fiscal year 10-11, and we can actually go through the report or we can respond to
I
questions.
just got a couple of questions. I think we've read it. The thing that has been consistent since we've been doing this report, and we appreciate that now that you are fine-tuning it, is this whole issue that you've created a new term, non-debt, or shadow debt, or whatever we call it.
Collectible?
Non-collectible?
Yeah.
Is that it has taken us now to this point, literally years, and yet we still can't get accurate numbers from LADOT or the fire department. And we've been saying the same thing over and over, that a lot of the fire department debt is uncollectible and is illegal to collect. Yet they continue to put it in a pile that shows it as debt. And in reality, we're talking, what is it, a third of what's reported, or less than a third, is actual clearly defined debt. And yet they keep reporting it as though it's real. And that's what is a little concerning. We've had about 4 or 5 versions of Executive Order 5, and it doesn't appear that people are complying with any one of the versions. And we still have this issue of saying there's $500 million worth of debt when we know it isn't even close. And that's what we want to find. I want to find out how and when we are going to be able to cut through this and give us take this non-debt out of the equation and give us the real figures.
Well, we're actually working with the departments as it relates to the fire department. As you indicated, sir, much of what's included in the uncollected debt truly is, in some cases, related to adjustments that are necessary because the contracted amount for Medicare and Medicaid is far less than the amount that was billed. And so the fire department, they are making efforts to make the necessary adjustments for that. The other part of it for the fire department represents severely aged accounts receivable that has gone through the city collection agencies and have found to be uncollectible. We're working with the city attorney's office as to what information can be provided to the Board of Review, which is chaired by the Controller's Office, as relates to HIPAA issues that have been raised. The fire department, they have identified as a first shot $108 million that they have submitted to the Board of Review for write-off. But because the information is provided at a summary level as opposed to at a detailed level as expected by the Board of Review, that item's been placed on hold, and I anticipate some action shortly. I'll let Mr. Whitmore speak more to that.
Ms. Cristobal is absolutely correct. I also sit on the Board of Review, and I do know that the fire department has sent a significant number for write-off. But there is a question that we continue to work with the city attorney's office about with the HIPAA issues, which we must maintain most absolute secrecy in terms of the specifics contained in the accounts, what will be allowed to see. What we are contemplating is one of 2 courses of action. One would be to tweak the procedures for the Board of Review, whereby we would be allowed to see the information on a summary level and get that written off. It is our intention and desire to get it done as quickly as possible. I would have hoped that it would be done now. We're working diligently with the city attorney to get this wrapped up within the next few weeks so that we can make sure that we move all of this forward long before the next meeting.
Let me just ask you one thing. Even when we use the term write-off, it gives an impression that it was eligible to be collected, when in fact, much of it by law, you can't. And so the key is, why is it in that category? It would appear that it's legally ineligible to be collected. It shouldn't even get into our debt process. It should be put aside and put it under a category illegal to collect. And then the things that we are legally able to collect should go into one pile. And if we then can't collect it, it may then get into a write-off. But by our using the term write-off gives it credence when there should not be any.
Your observation is absolutely correct, and I shouldn't bundle all of that together. There is that legitimately is scheduled for write-off, but the fire department has indicated that they have already made that correction in their accounting procedure. So most certainly that's already in that bucket will be adjusted, and on a go-forward basis, that will not come before.
So our future reports won't reflect $500 to $600 million of accounts receivable, and then have to subtract them out by showing that these aren't really collectible.
Councilman Parks, let me just say a couple of things. The accounting adjustments for the Medicare, Medicaid, that definitely is part of the uncollectible, which really shouldn't be uncollectible because it's money that the city couldn't contractually collect.
That's right.
So the fire department will be making adjustments for that. There are also legitimate accounts that have been billed and attempts have been made to collect by the collection agencies. The problem is a large percent of the amount that is in the uncollectibles is over 7 years old. It's greatly aged and it hasn't been written off. So the write-off process needs to take place with the Board of Review.
No, I agree, but I think even the key then is that if you have a 7-year-old debt and it's legitimate and we write it off, then the question would be, why did we hold it for 7 years? But we shouldn't keep asking and answering the same question that it's ineligible to collect, but we're going to keep reporting it as such.
I agree.
That's what I think we need to separate, because it's a different question if it's dated and we've never collected it, then the question is, why haven't we? And did they get it to your outside collectors? Those then are the questions that legitimately should be asked. But we can't get through that by having so much overwhelming debt that it appears the numbers are 5, 6, 10 times higher than what it should be. So that's what we'd like to see, that in the future that you talk about the 60 or 70 million dollars that we have that's on the books, that's legitimately debt. And the rest of that stuff is in another category that says it was not collectible, it's illegal to collect, it's not even a debt, it should be put aside under another category.
Yes.
Let me ask another thing. On your report, you go from 1 to 40 days and then 41 to 415. Why did we make such a jump on categorizing the debt or the aging of the debt?
That's on the citywide.
Yes, the 1 to 40 represents the amount where at day 41 is when it gets referred to collections.
Yeah.
41 to 415 is the time that an account will spend at primary collections. And then 416 to 595 is the secondary collections. And then 596 plus is just everything that's beyond.
The 595 is the secondary collections.
Yes, that is the end of the
And
secondary.
then after 595, it's, what is that? Is that write-off?
There's a table on page 5, and do you have that, sir, in front of you? Okay, if you look at the bottom, the days after service, the first billing is day 5. The days after delinquency 40 becomes the 75 days delinquency. And then it's referred to the primary collection agency. They are, by contract, allowed to keep the accounts for a year. And then after a year, the accounts are referred to the secondary collection agency, and by contract, they have 6 months to attempt to collect on the accounts.
And where are we on those? We're supposed to be renewing those RFPs for the primary and secondary collections. Is that coming up this year or next year?
They actually expire in September 2012, but we are working on preparing the draft RFPs. We want to make sure that it includes the recommendations from the Corps in terms of the criteria that should be included. We anticipate getting the RFPs on the street by March of 2012, which will give us ample time to select and have firms on board by September 2012.
Okay. And then how is the new FMS system helping you out?
Actually, the system is working well. We're actually pleased with it. Of course, the larger departments aren't using the FMS system for their accounts receivable, but we will be receiving information through the Centralized Accounts Receivable Project, which is the CAR project for FMS, and we anticipate that going online December of this calendar year, and we'll be receiving reports through that process.
Okay. And then final question I have is on the new process you have on liens. How is that working?
It's actually going very well for tax liens, and it's something that we are looking to have other departments consider as it relates to their debt. Of course, we want to make sure that it's sizable enough where it's cost beneficial to have departments exercise liens, because the process is quite costly. But for the Office of Finance, for our tax liens, I think to date we're actually over $1 million, and our annual budget is about $1 million. So, Jeff, what's the...
We're nearly at 1.4 million.
In collections through September.
Through September, right.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Thank you. Going back to thanks for catching the 41 to 415. I was going to ask the same question. That sort of stuck out. On the emergency ambulance billings, how do and I've heard it for quite some time about the patient rights and HIPAA laws and not being able to look at and figure out if we can write it off or not based on the patient activity. But how do other cities or counties or private ambulance companies that do billing, or how do the billing, the ones that are billed out for cities that are contracted out, how do they do it? Have we ever looked into that? How do they write it off?
We have spoken to some of the larger municipalities about that. Many of the cities that we regularly communicate with, it is all contracted out. So all of the entities would either have a memorandum of understanding or a business associates agreement that are required in order for them to do that. So that would be one of the avenues that we could pursue. But
I didn't quite get that part of it. They have an MOU or some type of
business associates agreement.
Okay, with the private ambulance company.
Correct.
How does the private ambulance company make the determination to look at it and say, okay, this is not collectible, or it's been rebilled at we repaid at a lower payment through insurance or Medi-Cal or Medicare, and therefore that gap, the differential between what was billed and what was collected, is not collectible, and they dismiss that? How do they make the determination?
In one of two ways. Either it is an accounting function, as we have highlighted here, where that correction is made. It's never collectible, and they're not able to collect it, so that accounting adjustment is made.
That's where I'm confused. Because what I've heard in the past, and then what I heard again today, was we haven't been able to yet exactly determine, because of the HIPAA laws, that patient confidentiality can't then be reviewed. But now you're telling me it's simply an accounting function. So that's where I'm confused.
If I could, Councilman Salvador Martinez, Fire Department. In our relationship with NCO, we share them with all the information we have. We have a business service agreement. They're fully HIPAA compliant, and they abide by all the HIPAA regulations. Those business associate agreements that were vetted through our city attorney, so that we know that they were in compliance and there was internal reviews. But they have all the information that we had in pursuing the collection effort. So they're not limited. It's just anybody else outside that sphere that does not have a business associate agreement that really, focuses on the liability, both criminal and civil, regarding the exposure or the breach of that private information to any outside forces.
I'm not suggesting that we shared the information with any outside forces or even with this body. What I'm saying is, from a financial perspective, if we're the ones billing it internally, because we haven't contracted out billing, we're the ones that have that responsibility. We know when the revenue comes in or doesn't. We know when we get a lower amount of payment from an insurance company or other for reimbursement that's lower than what was billed. We know that differential. I can't figure out, I still am confused in why we have so much on the books on ambulance billings where we've collected part of it.
And let me go back a step. It wasn't until really recently that the council authorized us to send our EMS billings to collections. Prior to November, December 2009, we did not have the authority per prior council action to send any of those ambulance billings to collection. It was only in November, December, when council provided us the authority, that we were then able to work with our
I'm not talking about collections or outside collections. Still not talking about collection. I'm talking about the amount that's not collected is the difference between sending it to collections. So if we never did anything with it, we billed somebody for $100, okay? Let's just throw a number out there, though it's like $650 back then, right? So we billed them for $100. Their insurance for Medi-Cal or Medicare paid back $75. We said then that $25 was outstanding, whether we sent it to collections or not, prior to 2009 or not. That amount has accumulated, plus penalties and interest and all the other things, or whatever we're keeping on the books, that we've never said that is not collectible, not bad debt, but not collectible. That has accumulated. And then the response back is, well, because of HIPAA laws, we haven't been able to review
Well,
the
no,
file.
let me clarify then, Councilman. That amount, which we don't include penalties, it's just the base amount, has been adjusted downward. So we are now working with the Office of Finance to adjust all those. So we do not send those Medicare or Medi-Cal ones to collections. It's just the ones where there's a private insurance or self-employed, or self-insured, rather, that's the term they use, that go to collections. So the ones that are limited.
Private insurance is anybody who has insurance outside of Medi-Cal or Medicare.
Yes, that goes along with self-pay.
Which is a lot of people. So all of those, how much money is that right now that we've received partial payment from insurance, and the differential, the gap, that hasn't been paid to the city, how much is that?
Well, normally, after you do the adjustments, we've been running about a 69-70% collection rate on those that are private insurance. And those that do not pay, those are the ones which we do send to collection. And we've been collecting now with NCO on a routine basis, $3-4 million a year now, based on our collections that we referred.
But I still go back to this. We still have on the books, because looking at this, and first of all, it says in collections right now under ambulance billings, there's no timeline on anything. It's all blank. It says 171 million, but there's no timeline on 0 to 30. There's 31 to 80, 181 to 270. The age of all the principal, and there's no interest for penalties, but the aging on all the principal, it goes up to 4 years. And it's all blank on page 3, at the top of page 3. So it's really difficult to follow this rationale when, and I'm still not able to figure out if we've got, let me ask it another way. Of the total amount here on this chart, which again, it's not aged in collections. I guess none of this has ever been sent to collections, according to this report.
Sir, according to the report, 171 million had been referred to collections. Unfortunately, we were not able to get the aging of that at the time of this reporting, but we anticipate in future reports to have the aging. One of the things that's important to note is that a large amount, the 309 million, a lot of it is severely aged, and some of it is actually out of statute. And as Mr. Martinez indicated, the fire department about in December of 2009 began referring accounts to the outside collection agencies. The outside collection agency that is being used is NCO, and they have collected on some of the delinquent debt, but much of it was returned because it was severely aged or out of statute. But going forward, they are referring accounts more timely.
So we don't get into the situation again. I still go back to, what is the issue that is holding us up with HIPAA laws? It keeps coming up, so I'm not still figuring out why that's brought up.
The HIPAA laws don't pertain to our referral of bad debt to NCO in our collection. It really refers to how much information on the account level that we can share for the Board of Reviewed Write-Offs, Councilman. That's sort of a different issue. In terms of once we clean this up, because we didn't have the authority to send those older accounts to collections, we believe within a year, all of those will have gone through the process and will be more
It was my understanding, under the HIPAA laws, I'm on the board of a hospital as well, and we review bad debt, that as long as if there's patient confidentiality is maintained, in other words, it's just a file number, with the circumstances, it could be reviewed. That's how private institutions do it as well.
We worked with the private institutions too, Councilman, and there are about 18 or 19 classifications that we cannot release per the HIPAA laws and per the advice and direction we've been given by the city attorney's office, and that's the frame that we're working in. We provide summary information. We can provide summary information on aging, how many are within 30 days, how many are between 30 and 90 days, how many between 90 and 100 days, et cetera. That information we can provide. It's just the information that could be pertain to or tied back to an actual account, which then can release the individual for treatment for whatever that individual was treated for. That's where there's some concerns, and it could be better explained really by the city attorney's office than myself.
Okay. I'd request, I don't want to take up the committee's time on all this. If I could request a briefing on this. I know you guys have already gone through this in detail, and being newer member. I'd like a briefing on this in the next 2 weeks if possible.
I was going to suggest, there's quite a few questions.
A lot of
Yes.
questions I'm just not comfortable with.
There's quite a bit. This finance has a quarterly report, and certainly it's presenting information on age.
So if I could request that, and if the chair would indulge that, I would,
That's fine.
that'd be great.
You know, and I may have a too simplistic a view. Every time I hear the HIPAA kinds of issues, from my judgment, it would appear that it's within the fire department's control to not put that type of material in a collectible category and keep it in a category that it's not collectible by law, would solve most of these issues. Because you're not going to collect it, you don't have to share the information. That's the bulk of it.
I agree 100%. The problem is that the amounts have been sitting there for many, many years
No,
and
but
have not
when
been adjusted, and so they are correcting that, as Mr. Martinez
But I said,
indicated.
if it's legitimate collectible debt, then it should be, if it's dated, then it should be written off, and they should be asked to do better in the future.
That is,
They could solve a lot of this by not putting the debt in a category that's collectible when it's not collectible.
And that's what we're working on right now with the Office of Finance, Councilman. You'll see it.
And that's, I guess, where my frustration is, because I understand you are, but the fire department has that ability, but I've been hearing this for years, and it doesn't seem that we've ever gotten anywhere, only we keep hearing they're working on it, and then it keeps coming up. And I will tell you that when we're out and talking to the community and residents and the media, so one thing people want to latch onto is the fact that we have all these uncollected, we've started task forces and ad hoc committees and appointed special consultants on collections. We've talked about collection czars. The fact is, a bulk of the collections and outstanding debt isn't collectible. It hasn't been categorized or classified. There's ways to fix it, and all we keep hearing back, and I'm getting tired of it, and I'm new. So I can't even imagine where my colleagues are coming from on this, is all we keep hearing back is, yeah, we're working on it, and we have these laws, and we have to adhere to them. And yeah, meanwhile, private industries and other cities and counties aren't necessarily having this same issue or this problem on this issue in terms of ambulance collections, and which is the bulk of it. And then when we get a report back to say, well, we didn't really have time for the report to put in the aging of the collections, this has been going on for a long time. I mean, it's unacceptable. And I would ask that if you know, I'm not sure if this is a receive and file, if we're passing this on to council.
We got a note and file, but we got to add about 6 instructions.
Okay, the only instruction that I would add, well, besides if we can add a 7th one on the ambulance billing, is we can keep that one alive and bring it back with an update on
That's going to be number 1.
exactly what's going on.
That's number 1.
Okay, great, thank you.
Just out of curiosity, I know we've talked about this forever. Where do we stand on creating an inspector general or collections czar? How far are we from making that happen, or have we given up on making that happen?
No, we have not given up on that. I believe we're actually in the process of receiving some applications, and I believe there will be a request going to your committee on the exemption for that individual. I don't know if you've heard that item yet, or it will be coming shortly.
That's 30, 60, or 90 days past due.
It's called a collection corporal now.
441 days.
Let's hope soon.
Yes.
We no longer have a czar.
Also, I'm not sure if this is totally on target as a question, but how are we doing on collections of taxes as opposed to just debts owed to us? Are we doing any better in parking tax collections and some of the other categories?
I think we're doing much better as it relates to taxes. With regards to parking occupancy tax, I think we are about $1 million or $2 million ahead of budget through September. We are working closely with the police commission staff on revoking parking lots, as well as working with the city attorney's office on accounts that have been referred to litigation. The police commission just recently approved a report by the commission staff to require parking lot operators to have revenue control equipment. And that report, I believe, will be going forward.
What kind of equipment I can name?
Revenue control equipment, which is one of the items that we had recommended, which will help improve not only collections, but also for auditing of the collections. We are working with the city attorney's office on requiring bonds for parking lot operators so that they set aside X amount of money up front before they can operate a parking lot. On the business tax side, we are tracking very close to budget, even though we did come in slightly under as compared to the budget for last year, as well as our other taxes.
Are we doing anything to identify sort of bandit parking lots that are operating as parking lots but aren't paying taxes and aren't on our books?
That's part of the parking revocation and closure program. We actually have staff within the Office of Finance who identify parking lot operators who are operating without a police permit and owe taxes. And we submit that information to the police commission. They send staff out there and close down the lots or arrest the individuals. And of course, as I've indicated, if we do require bonds for these parking lot operators, that will certainly address a lot of the operators holding on to the monies that are due to the city.
That sounds encouraging. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me go through a couple of instructions and ask for instruction number one, ask the CAO to work with the Office of Finance to improve department's reporting and timely and accurate account receivable, perhaps adding a compliance list to either the quarterly report by Office of Finance or to the financial status report with specific emphasis on the emergency ambulance services billing and the parking citation billing. Instruction two, that we ask that the mayor's office put emphasis on executive order number 5, requesting all department heads to comply with their responsibility in collecting revenue. Item 3, that we ask the Office of Finance to ensure that the March 2012 date on the RFP for secondary and primary collections stays on course, and that we not allow the current contracts to expire. On number 4, that we ask the Office of Finance to ensure that the centralized account receivable reporting CARS is in place and it's functional at the appropriate time. Item 5 is that we ask the CAO to continue reporting the progress on liens served by Office of Finance in our FSRs. 6, that we ask that the Office of Finance provide a briefing to CD12 regarding the issue of the HIPAA requirements and also the collections of...
Can I amend that and just send that to Public Safety?
Public Safety. We ask that briefing go to Public Safety regarding that issue addressing ambulance billing. Also, we ask the CAO and Office of Finance on the directions provided during Revenue Day that we get a status report on the request that all of our revenue sources have an outside audit. And then we'd also ask for a briefing for both the Public Safety and Budget and Finance as the current status of the automated ambulance billing system. So that's a couple of recommendations. Jack. With that, we'll move that item with those instructions.
Sir, if I could just state something, it would be helpful if the city attorney is involved in the briefing on HIPAA, if that's possible.
Yeah.
That's on that instruction number 1, we could add the city attorney on that.
The city attorney or a city attorney?
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.